come on color theory. And on May 14th, we'll do an artist studio visit with David Camerzel, a well-known, his works get purchased immediately at the Coors Art Show. So he's loved by everyone locally, or a lot of people anyway. So let's turn it over to Mary and we'll get on with the program today.
Okay, if people have questions, should they put it in chat, Hannah?
Put it in chat and I'll interject them if it's appropriate, or we'll do some questions from the audience at the end.
Okay.
Also wanted to remind people this program is being recorded and it's going to be put on our website.
Great.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, well, first of all, before we get into my questions to Michael, I want to introduce him and give you some background on him. Most of you, I think, know Michael Paglia through his columns as a critic of art and architecture in Westward, where they have appeared since 1995. And in addition, he has been a script writer, voice-over narrator, producer, director, and editor of Art World films and documentaries. He served as a curator and juror of art exhibitions. Michael has been the co-author or author of more than a dozen monographs and books on art, artists, and architecture. His reports, essays, and feature articles have been published in numerous regional and national art periodicals. Michael has taught at the Rocky Mountains College of Art and Design and lectures in art history at UC Denver. And today we're going to find out about the mind of an art critic. So I'll start with some questions for Michael, and please don't hesitate to put your questions in chat, everything you've ever wanted to know about an art critic. So first question, the obvious one is, how did you become an art critic?
It's kind of an interesting story. I was someone who was interested in the art world. I'd done the coursework for a master's degree in art history at CU Boulder. I was attending all the exhibits, and there was a small monthly here in Denver called Icon, and Simon Zalkind who was an art consultant, was the art reviewer. And he got a job with the Colorado Department of the Arts and Humanities. So he needed to give that up because of a conflict of interest. So Sidney Payton, who was a gallery owner and would later be the director of the Denver Museum of Contemporary Art, suggested my name to the editor, and he hired me. And this would have been in 1990. And I wrote for Icon, and then later for the Muse, which was a state art newspaper, and eventually was hired by Westward in 1995, in March of 1995. My motivation was that when I looked back on what I had learned in college and graduate school, that basically I had learned how to read and write, while my friends had learned how to be lawyers and doctors and accountants. And so I figured it was the only thing I could do was to write.
Now, when you're an art critic, because I can see how you got to that place, how did you, over time, get all the assignments? I'm just not thinking only of Westward, but all the other things you've been involved in. How did they happen to come to you?
Well, you know, it's really funny because I'm a very unambitious person. So basically, none of that, nothing I've done otherwise have I solicited for. I've been asked to do it. And I think it's based on my pre-existing work. I developed a relationship with a publisher in New Mexico based on my writings about the Museum of Western Art, the Anschutz collection. And they were impressed by what I had said. The same thing with the documentaries, with the architecture books. I was always asked to do it. Even I was the regional editor, the Denver editor for Art LTD, and they just contacted me out of the blue. But it's based on the fact that so much of my work's on the internet that people have seen it and read it and then say, well, we have a place for you.
Okay. I have also always wondered, do museum personnel and artists tremble when you appear in the doorway?
You know, I would say not. And the reason is because I made a decision when I first started writing. I made the decision to champion the best things. So I might have, you know, it's kind of funny. Artists are very sensitive, and I'll have an overall fabulous review, and then 2 sentences of criticism, and they're deeply hurt. You know, I thought we were friends. You know, that kind of thing. So it's really funny. I can imagine if I did burn down the house reviews, but I do those directed at large institutions, what would be considered important shows. And I've gone after my share of local institutions for decisions they've made.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of a burn down review in Denver?
Well, you know, I'm reluctant to go down this path, but
You don't
I
have
was,
to.
I'll mention that I was very disappointed in History Colorado and the exhibits there and the direction that the institution had taken. I'm relentlessly disappointed in the Biennial of the Americas, which I think has never really tapped into the community here. And exploited the rich vein of artists and talent we have here. That's really the kind of thing. The Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center some years ago contemplated tearing down their building or seriously altering their building, and I declared war on them for months until they blinked. And was happy to say that everyone involved with the decision was gone within 6 months from the institution.
Okay.
I'm particularly critical of people who would tear down historic buildings, you know, who are actually taking away from what we have, our cultural equity here.
What kind of preparation do you do, if any, before you review an exhibition or an artist show?
Okay, I everything I write about is pre-screened. So I have an idea of what the most important exhibits or events or whatever are that are right on the agenda, that are right happening right now. When I go to the show is when I do the preparation. You know, I'm saying I pre-screen it because I go, oh, I'll be interested in that. People will be interested in that. That has a lot of potential. You know, there's only been a couple times when I've walked into a show and thought, oh, I couldn't possibly review this. It's terrible. So I have to find something else. But there's always a ton happening. So it's not hard to find something to write about. But once I get to the show, my process is to interview whoever I need to, meaning the artist, the gallery director, the curator, whoever it is that I feel like I need to talk with about the show. I get a checklist of the exhibit so that I know what's in the exhibit. I record everything with photographs. I'll record details, close-ups of details that I think I might write about. I mean, I do much more legwork than winds up being in a 1,200 word column, you know. But I want to have everything at my disposal so that if I decide, well, I want to talk about this passage in this painting, I'll be able to look at it when I'm writing.
Now, are you mingling at an opening, or when do you see what you're reviewing?
I almost never go to an opening. I will go to special events, you know, like someone's retiring or they're opening a new space or gallery. I go when no one is there. When I go to the Denver Art Museum, no one is there. It's before they open, or when they used to close on Mondays, it would be Mondays. That's basically, and even with, say, I go to an opening, there's no way I could review that show without going back and looking at the show, because that's going to be completely occupied with talking to people. And, you know, and that whole, I think openings are great, you know, and I like going to the events that I go to. Also, when I go to an opening, okay, I've in Westward, until this year, the COVID year, I focused on local artists. So that means if I go to an opening, I'm going to have 25 local artists try to get me to review their show. And that is hard to deal with. So it's easier to see the show when no one's there, and I maybe do a phone interview with the artist, or they meet me at the show and we walk through together.
Okay.
So I try to understand what they're doing.
So are you ever exposed to crowds that are commenting on the work or the exhibition, or are you kind of your own person walking around without hearing other comments?
Yeah, I'm my own person, and have an idea of, you know, I have an idea of whether something works or doesn't, whether I like it or not, you know, so, which I think is very fair, you know. I don't just talk about my taste, and it really isn't about my taste, but is something an authentic expression of what it is or what it's intended to be, much more than whether I like it or not. Not that I don't have my own taste,
Yeah.
but that's not, I'm looking at the phenomenology of the art, of the exhibit, how it's put together. If any of you read the review I did of the opening of the new 19th century galleries at the Denver Art Museum, it talks about, you know, the people involved. It talks about how it's laid out. It talks about stylistic analysis. It talks about what are the best pieces in the show, or the most important artists. So I try to weave all that together into the review.
That's why it's fun to read your reviews. Do you ever read other people's reviews before publishing your own?
Oh, absolutely never. And in fact, I almost never read other people's reviews of things I've reviewed or intend to review. And mostly I read national art writers like Peter Sheldall in the New Yorker,
Mhm.
Roberta Smith in the New York Times. I look at Hyperallergic. You know, I look at those kind of sources, and I don't really look at the local art writing.
Can you tell us what the best part of being an art critic is?
The best part is seeing those shows all by myself with the curator and artist, and you know, really get to see a show, which I mean, if you think about the Monet show, for example, I mean, I bet it would have been impossible to look on a regular day with hundreds and hundreds of people. But when I went to the press preview, there were, you know, just a few people there. So that's kind of the best part. If I were a drinker, the best part would be all the free alcohol. But I'm not much of a drinker. But that is probably the greatest perk of having my position in the art world, is being offered cocktails.
That's great. Now tell us what the worst part of being an art critic is.
The pressure that everyone wants you to write about them. And you know, that I used to, as I said, for 25 years, from 1995 to 2020, March of 95 to March of 2020, I had a column every week, plus I had additional reviews, maybe 2 or 3 a week. So I could really cover the waterfront. Since COVID, and since I've been cut back to a couple of pieces, 1 or 2 pieces a month, it really hurts me that I see exhibits, but that there's just no opportunity to review them. And the artists are sort of unaware that this has happened, even though I only write about what I call 5-star art stories, like Christo dying, or a new show opening at the museum. But the shows at the alternative spaces and the galleries, those have mostly been left out this year.
Yeah. You also are an architectural critic. And what do you see as, what are your favorite 2 buildings in Denver?
My favorite 2.
Yeah, your favorite.
Are we talking about new buildings or any building?
Oh, that's a good question. Both.
Both. I really like that Pulcinelli building that's kind of west of the DCPA with the floating glass curtain walls. I think it's called the Omni building, with the crystalline shape at the roof line, which is very nearby. I think those are both great. I've done a couple of lists of 10 buildings and then 10 more buildings built since the 21st century, beginning of the 21st century in downtown Denver. Now, if I was going to mention an old building, the Brown Palace is magnificent. That's a magnificent building. The Paramount Theater is a wonderful building. The old Western National Bank, which is a 50s building, I think is a wonderful building. I think we have a lot of good buildings. I think most of the new buildings aren't any good, but there are some. You know, as I said, I did these compilations of lists of good buildings in downtown Denver for Westward, but I also did ugly buildings, and as another list, actually a couple lists. And it was so easy to find the good buildings because they stuck out like sore thumbs. but the bad buildings were, you know, just everywhere. There were hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Mary, can I just interrupt for a second? There have been a couple of questions. One, before we get too far on, would like to, if Michael, you could talk about why you don't read other art critics' reviews.
Well, of local reviews, well, I don't want to be affected by it. You know, I don't want to knock someone off subconsciously. That's really basically it. And as I said, I read the national critics. I've been reading art critics since I was a teenager, which is like 100 years ago. So I've read a lot of art writing, but there isn't very much local art writing, first of all. And so almost never is a show I've reviewed. When the Rocky Mountain News was still around, and the Rocky Mountain News Denver Post Westward had a keen competition between art writers, I would read that stuff, especially Mary Chandler in the Rocky Mountain News. But now that it's there's so little art writing, it just doesn't make sense for me to do it. And like I said, I don't want to be twisted in the way I look at something by someone else's point of view.
That makes a lot of sense. How about, do you have some favorite emerging Denver artists?
Oh gosh, it's so hard to answer a question like that just because everybody wants me to mention their name. And I'm going to sit here, and I think that there's a lot of great young talent in Denver. I think we have an extremely vibrant art scene here. Despite COVID, I think we're still flourishing in spite of everything. I think that shows the dedication of the artists. Very few galleries have closed. A number of the alternative spaces have been forced to move over the last several years out to Lakewood. But I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. I would say hit the main galleries, places like Robichon, Havu, William Havu, hit Pirate, seek out these different galleries. Susan Freud at Westward will do a weekly roundup of shows that are opening. I think just get out there. I think there's probably 20 emerging artists who are great. Any more viewer questions or?
Nope, not just yet, but I'll be back.
Do
Okay.
either of you guys have questions? I'm kind of at the end of mine. Yes, I've asked every single question that I had.
I'll just lay a philosophical thing that occurred to me. I started at Icon. Icon was a Lodo focused newspaper, monthly tabloid. And I could really be wild when I was writing there because it was as though I had a switchblade and I could go after the art world. But when I got to Westward, I realized that I had a machine gun, and I didn't want to use that. I didn't want to hurt anybody, metaphorically speaking, and or actually speaking. And I realized that a little something from me in print could mean a great deal to someone else. And so I've always tried to have a generosity of spirit in writing about the art world. I mean, I will make constructive criticisms, but that I really am championing what's going on here in Denver and realizing how little it takes to nurture and encourage an artist, a curator, or some other creative person.
You know, you're bringing up a completely existential question about an art critic. What is their job? Is their job to criticize and therefore move art forward? Or is there,
I think it's a multifarious. I think what you're talking about is certainly, I talked about History Colorado. I had proposed 10 shows they should do, for example. So, with the Biennial of the Americas, I think I did 10 of those, a list of how it could be improved. I think History Colorado listened to me a little bit. I think the Biennial didn't. So there is that function, or someone, you just don't review a show that people expect you to review, and they realize that they've gone off track, or so there is that, but there's also the audience of the artist, him or herself. There's the audience of the gallery goer, the viewer. So you're trying to bring into account all those different elements of the job. I think the most important thing, like I said, my column is this phenomenology. So I'm trying to give context. I'm trying to tell the narrative of the creators. I'm trying to do a stylistic analysis, and I'm, like I said, I'm pre-selecting. So the stuff that I'm selecting is worth writing about,
yeah.
in some way.
So a couple more questions. What do you think of Art Forum magazine?
I think it was once a great magazine. I think that it's okay now. And we're in a period of the decline of art writing, which is odd because we have the internet. So you would think there would be this flowering of art writing, but there really hasn't been. And I think it's just the good old economics. Print media is in trouble. Art periodicals were on the edge already in the print media. And we haven't really seen, other than something like Hyperallergic or Art News, not Art News Magazine, but Art News aggregators on the internet. We haven't seen that. I guess here in Denver, a new publication has begun called Daria. And I haven't seen it, but there's obviously a group of people attempting to push this forward. Art Forum was once the arbiter of contemporary art. I would say in the 70s. If they said it in Art Forum, it was a commandment in art, but I don't think there's any intellectual organ like that at all anymore.
Do people pay attention to an art critic's negative or positive review to make their own decision of whether to like or not like an artist?
I think maybe to like or to respect an artist, but I don't think it plays into selling the work or buying. I don't think that anything, for example, I'll see two shows and one show really stinks, and I can't believe how bad it is. The other show is really good. And then I'll go back to the gallery and they've sold half the stuff that I thought stinks, and they won't have sold any of the person I thought was doing a good job.
Wow.
So interesting. Michael, you didn't mention the Philip Johnson cash register building. Is it on your good list?
Yeah, that wouldn't be since the 21st century, but the greatest period for building in downtown Denver is the oil boom. And that is an exemplar of oil boom architecture. Those are the finest, most expensive buildings ever built in Colorado by a who's who cast of star architects, including Philip Johnson. I think that's a very good building. I wish it hadn't eaten the IMP Mile High Center. And if you've been around Denver a long time, you know that that atrium is where the E.F. Hutton was, which was a beautiful building with a parabolic arch form and beautiful gardens with a waterfall with trout. And it envelops a part of that IMP Tower, which was a very early work for Pei and his first work in Denver. But overall, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful building.
I agree with you on that one. What constitutes a great exhibition?
My initial response would be je ne sais quoi. It's like all these different parts coming together. It needs a good underpinning, like a narrative underpinning, scholarly underpinning. It has to be beautifully designed, thoughtfully composed. I think, I want to praise Angelica for what she did in the 19th century galleries, because in a way, the 19th century doesn't make any sense because there's so much happening. And in many ways, it's just not one leads to the next. It really isn't. So you have those academic painters working at the same time as the realists. But she really figured out a way to look at it, taking into account that you couldn't do a chronology and make any sense, but a way of looking at it as you start with the earliest work on the Ponte side of the gallery and work your way to the newest work by the time you enter the Hamilton. And I think she did an incredible job with that. I've seen a lot of great shows at the Denver Art Museum.
I agree.
I thought the Diego Rivera Frida Kahlo show was a great show.
Do you ever do any podcasts that we can look up?
I haven't done that. No.
That might be your next step.
You think?
Yeah, I do. So what do you think about digital artists and the explosion of NFTs? That's really appropriate right now.
Yeah. Are you thinking about that record breaking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's I think there's some kind of story there, meaning not completely an art story. I think it's a Bitcoin story. Let me say, I think digital art is great. It's just another thing. It's like taking, it's like a photograph or whatever. It's just the next technological development. It's going from tempera to oil paint. I mean, it's just, it's obviously there. But I think that particular piece was about speculation, about promoting a certain business interests. It doesn't really, if you think about it, it makes sense when somebody pays $100 million for a Rothko or $100 million for a Jean-Michel Basquiat. This didn't make sense in that world.
Yeah, it's hard to understand, I think, for us at this point, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Where it goes. So this might be hard to narrow down to one, but what is your favorite museum in the USA and in Europe?
Well, in the USA, I mean, it would have to be MoMA, right? And in the world, I haven't been everywhere in the world, but I think it's hard to top the Vatican museums, which could take you 2 months to get through. But the Louvre's great too, the National Gallery in Washington's great.
We are lucky to have many. So someone asked,
Right.
What is an NFT? And I'll let you go ahead and answer it, or I can.
No, you're going to have to answer it.
I think I wrote it down recently.
See, one of the things about that, what's the artist's name? That's
Beeple.
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 You know,
And
Beeple
it is a
ha-
non-fungible token.
right. Beeple has a financial interest in the company that bought it, that bought the painting. And the company that bought the painting is one of those cryptocurrency companies. So I think it was like just a very smart advertising stunt,
Mhm.
more than people are going to revere Beeple.
Interesting. I think I'm to the end of my questions from the audience, unless someone else wants to speak up. Feel free.
You
I
could-
don't understand, but you have suggested it's economics, but the lack of critical art writing is astounding to me. Because when we had newspapers, there was so much to read. There was
Right.
really a lot to read. And now doesn't seem to be anything on the internet. And I really don't see a lot in Denver. And is it
No.
economics? Because the art market is flourishing.
Right.
So,
Right. I think you look at something like Westward, and so Westward is getting its advertising from brew pubs and from restaurants when they were open, pot stores, that kind of thing. They're not getting it from galleries. And so there's that. And even nationally, you don't find, I'll just say this, that in 2019 was kind of a high point for me. The Arvada Center mounted 2 exhibits based on a book I co-authored called Colorado Abstract. And there was a companion exhibit at the Kirkland Museum. Now, in these 2 exhibits were more than 100 Colorado artists beginning in the 1930s and coming to the present who worked in some abstract manner. No one reviewed that show. I couldn't because it was based on my book, but no one else reviewed that show. Then at the same time, overlapping with this, the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center and its predecessor, the Broadmoor Art Academy, mounted a show on the history of the Broadmoor Art Academy, Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center School, which would go from 1919 to the mid-1970s. And there were over 200 Colorado artists in that. No one here reviewed that show. And I couldn't because I was a consultant. I had written the wall text for that show. So, it would have been a conflict of interest for me to write about it. So I felt like, as 2019 came to an end and before we had the disastrous year of 2020, I just couldn't believe that there was no art writing directed at these shows that together had more than 300 artists who had worked in Colorado over this huge span of decades, that there was like no interest. And like I said, I had a conflict of interest. Or if I hadn't been involved with those shows, I would have, absolutely positively, wild horses couldn't have stopped me from reviewing shows of that caliber.
That would be a perfect spot to do a podcast. You could just go and do it, even though you're reviewing your own work. People would click onto it to see it. It would get exposure. It would be great. Somehow we need to champion some of these causes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael, you're getting marketing advice from Mad About Art.
I think that's great. No, I thought people have urged me to do a blog, to do these things, and I just haven't I haven't done it. Let's just say that.
Well, do a podcast. We'll put it on our website and that'll get you
Yeah.
a start.
Okay.
Oh, great idea.
Phil Heinschel has a question. And for anybody else, if you have a question, you could unmute yourself. And then you don't have to do chat right now. If you want. So go ahead, Phil.
I would like to know what you know about reaction to your writings and what you care about it.
Reactions to my writings. It's really, I found it's really interesting that this is just sort of an aside at first, that I get lovely thank you notes from basically two kinds of people. And that is older women and young guys who I'm their first review or whatever. And otherwise nobody does that. But gallery directors have told me that they see an uptick in attendance after one of my reviews. And that's certainly something that I want to happen. Is that answering that?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, gosh.
I'm just looking at, anybody else have a question? I'm just checking it out.
Michael, this has been great fun.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. It's been really interesting. And a first for me, and not standing at a lectern in front of a group of people.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. So for everybody here, Michael, this has been recorded and should be on our website, where we have all of our lectures this year, 2020, have been recorded that you can listen to there. Hannah, you were gonna, someone asked a question about the upcoming programs.
I did put it into the chat, but I can repeat them one more time. April 22nd, we'll have Skip Whitcomb with Color Theory. It'll help us look at our art and analyze it in a better way. And then May 14th, both of these are at 1 o'clock. The Artist Studio Visit with David Camerzell. We right now are working on a couple of things that could be in person in June, and we'll be announcing those soon. So we're thinking that by June, some people will be comfortable. They've been vaccinated and we can wear masks and we can make that work. And certainly come the end of July, July 25th, we'll have our sculpture garden party. So
Yes.
Michael, you'll be invited with an honorary membership to our organization, and we'd love for you to partake in any of the things that we have coming up. So keep that in mind too. I'll be sending you something about it.
Well, thanks. And thanks to Matt About Art for inviting me to talk today. I've loved being an art critic. It's been my identity for most of my adult life. And there's just an inexhaustible supply of things to see and then to talk about what you've seen.
So Michael, there was one last question about what are the isms of the 21st century? Like Cubism was the 20th century. Have you seen any isms?
Well, I think we've gone sort of beyond the idea of isms. Certainly conceptual art is the dominant art form of the 21st century. And then close second would be photo and photo-based art, which would include everything from still photographs to video. The idea of, I know interactive art is really big, right now. This is what we see coming at Meow Wolf. But I think it tips more into the amusement park category than the exhibition category often. But that's certainly a big influence. And, you know, conceptual installation, process, interactive. I think that's the big news in art. The rise of women, a new awareness of women in art, and African Americans in art, people of color. We're seeing a new awareness of this, both in how people like, there's the Senge Ngundi show that's at the Denver Art Museum. Here is somebody who was, you know, should have been famous a generation ago, but was overlooked because they were an African American woman, because she was an African American woman. And that a lot of that is being corrected and changed. And so now she is achieving the level of attention that she deserves.
Any other questions?
This has been so interesting, Michael. I can't wait to review it again once it gets on our website. I always like to relook at some of them. Sometimes I miss a few things, and I'll look forward to reviewing it again. And I'm sure some of the members that were not able to be with us today will review it as well. And so we love being able to put them on there. So thank you again. Everyone is sending great notes about thank you, informative. They've learned a lot. So thank you. We applaud you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And hosting me.
Thank you so much, Michael. All right. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining.